LinkedIn is a business-oriented social networking service with approximately 400 million users registered. Basically, it's a site to help business owners or those in charge of hiring to find qualified candidates to fill open positions. What does this have to do with stalking, you ask? Well, when we think of stalkers or the act of stalking online, we think of the more mainstream social sites like Facebook or Twitter. But as you can imagine, stalkers have a more difficult time stalking people in real life utilizing these sites than you might think. That is, unless people are more giving with personal information. Now, picture a situation in which there is a site where you can create a profile and for the most part remain anonymous as to who you really are, while at the same time, this site grants you or anyone the ability to create ads for jobs for open positions, or in other words, an open invitation to people eager for a job who are more than willing to meet you in person for that chance at the open spot. Depending on location, hundreds or even thousands of people at your fingertips. Now, what if the person creating ads for jobs on this site is not actually someone in charge of hiring at all? What if they are simply looking for their next victim? I think you get what I mean. With a pool of 400 million potential victims, there is more than a few who are naive enough to believe whatever you tell them, especially if it means they might get the position. I worked at a mortgage servicing company for 15 years. At the end of those 15 years, the company closed its doors due to mismanagement by the people upstairs who ran things. Certainly wasn't the best time to lose my job, as I had just bought a new car, but then again, is there ever a good time to lose your job? I immediately began searching for a job when I arrived home that day. Monster, Indeed. Most of the sites everyone knows is where my nose was planted for the following 2 weeks. Most jobs I simply wasn't qualified for, as they wanted anywhere from a bachelor's degree to a master's degree. I was lucky to even have a high school diploma as much as I partied back then. I had no savings really, and seeing as I was desperate, I took a job as a janitor for a local school. It was mostly nights, which I didn't mind so much, but still, when it came down to it, I was scrubbing bathrooms and toilets on my hands and knees. So yeah, not exactly what I had in mind. My friend recommended a place that she used to get her job, and also mentioned that where she worked had just started hiring. Why not? I remember thinking to myself. Hopefully I would find something that didn't involve waiting in human filth for 8 hours. The site was called LinkedIn. I had never heard of it before then. When I arrived home around midnight, I created my profile. It was pretty straightforward. List your basic information and basically put your resume on your profile. The site reminded me of a more complex MySpace back when it was still a thing, minus the business aspect, of course. It wasn't long before I found where my friend worked and decided to try to connect, for lack of a better term, with the people who hire for them. Within a week, I had an interview downtown with Kelly, which I assume was one of the human resources personnel. I waited almost an hour to finally talk to someone after I arrived. I had to take a series of computer tests and then a face-to-face interview. The interview itself went fine, and I was actually really hopeful. 2 days later, they notified me that they had promoted from within to fill the position. Of course they did. It had been 2 months now, and the janitor job wasn't paying my bills. I was 2 months behind on my car payment, and of course, the bank had started sending love notes in the mail and whispering sweet nothings on my voicemail. I decided to let the car go and started walking to work. 2 days later, I received a message on LinkedIn from a marketing firm looking for office help near 4th Street. I wasted no time replying to the message expressing my interest. I received a reply from a man named Frank, stating that the office would be closed for the next couple days to replace old wiring, and if I could meet him at the coffee shop about 5 minutes from the marketing firm for an interview. I instantly shot back a yes and asked for a time and day. Upon his request, I met Frank the next day at 3 p.m. at the coffee shop. It was laid back and the interview went just fine. There weren't many marketing questions or even questions about experience in an office. After around 10 minutes of talking, Frank's phone rang. He stepped up from his chair and said that his boss was the one who called, and that he needed to go unlock the office for some workmen to deliver sheetrock that they were replacing. He asked for me to ride with him to the office and we could start the new hire paperwork. The interview was simply a formality to make sure I looked presentable, to make sure I wasn't some weirdo or something, and that I had the job, he said. What else would I say to someone who just offered me a job other than yes? We entered his car and he pulled away slowly from the coffee place and down the street. I did notice that this car was a little dated. It looked like it was from the 80s or something. I immediately noticed he was going the wrong direction from 4th Street, but didn't say anything right away. We ended up driving 5 or 6 blocks in the opposite direction when I finally mentioned the office was the other way. To which he replied, "Open your mouth again. I'll permanently shut it for you." And he pointed a gun directly on the temple of my head. I know, in that moment, I must have gone completely white in the face and looked terrified. I remember him looking at me right after and saying, "Aw, gonna cry, princess?" I thought of what seemed like a billion different things all at once. It's amazing how quickly the mind thinks. I thought of my family. I thought of my childhood. I thought about my funeral. And I thought of multiple ways to try to get out of this mess, all within the span of just a few seconds. The car turned to get on the highway, and I knew that if I let this car get rolling 70 miles an hour down the highway, away from everything and everyone I knew, away from the area I was familiar with, that my chances were bleak. He pulled onto the on-ramp, and I knew he would be distracted trying to steer the car through the curve and onto the highway. This was my chance. I drew back and hit him with everything in my body, like I was trying to punch a hole in the side of the car. It knocked him out. I grabbed the gun and slammed the car into park. The vehicle came screeching to a halt, along with several other strange noises. I'm sure it wasn't good for it going into park, going around 40 miles per hour. I reached for my phone that had since fallen in the floor to try to call for help. He must have came to while I was searching for my phone in the floorboard, because he grabbed for the gun. I bit his arm and turned the gun on him and fired. It pierced his chest. When the authorities arrived, I explained what happened. An ambulance took the man away, where he later passed away in the hospital. I wasn't charged for anything. It was ruled self-defense. I still find it difficult to deal with the fact that I killed another human being. I know that he would have done the same to me, but still, it doesn't make it any easier. I know what you're thinking. Some person asks to interview you at a coffee shop, then asks you to get into a 2 or 3 decade old car, and you don't even raise an eyebrow? I know. Hindsight is always 20/20, but honestly, it was the furthest thing from my mind. I just wanted the job. That was all my mind was focused on. On a side note, 3 weeks later, I was hired at my friend's job. Another position opened up and they gave me a call. I've since bought a new car. Well, for me, a new car. It has 40,000 miles on it. See there? Who said a sad story couldn't end on a happy note?